All right, so if you do end up coming to the beach for our semi-field trip, there are some things that you need to remember and to pay attention to when you're there. So we do like to go to the beach when it's a negative tide during the day. The negative tide means that you get more of the beach exposed and you want it during the day because if the negative tide occurs at 1 a.m., you're not going to be able to see anything. So you need it during daylight hours. Intertidal safety, so you never turn your back on the waves, okay, because waves come up faster than you think they do, and so you can get caught off guard, so don't turn your back on the waves, and also watch your footing. Okay? We don't want you slipping. And then when you're there, this is just good for any time you're at the beach. When you're there, if you pick up plants and animals to look at them, that's allowed, but please put them back where you found them. Right? Remember, they're in that spot for a reason. They're trying to survive until the next high tide, and so they pick that spot to help them to survive. So make sure you put them back. If you do pick up rocks, look underneath them, turn those rocks back over, same reasoning. And then if it's possible, try to avoid stepping on things, but sometimes it's just not possible. And then take only pictures, leave only footprints. So don't take like all the shells with you, and don't leave trash and stuff like that. And if you do see trash, pick it up. All right? So those are just your intertidal manners. All right. Estuaries. Oh, well, first, spots that you can go are really good for going to see cool things in the tide pools. Leo Carrillo is probably where we're going to go. That's this bottom left picture. But you can see a bunch of different places that you can go. So you can look at a tide chart and figure it out and go to the intertidal zone if you want. All right, estuaries. So that's our other type of habitat that you can see where rivers go into the ocean, okay, that are on the edges of the oceans. So you have the intertidal zone, and then you have estuaries. There are three things that are required that things are required to have in order to be considered an estuary. The first thing is that they must be semi-enclosed. So they have to have limited access to salt water. Okay? Basically, it has to be enclosed like on 3 sides by land. All right, so it has to have restricted access to the salt water. So semi-enclosed. Second thing you have to have is you have to have 2 water types. So you have to have fresh water and you have to have salt water, okay, from the ocean. Fresh water from the river or stream. The third thing that you need is mixing between those 2 water types. All right, so you get semi-enclosed, 2 water types, mixing, estuary. Okay, so those are the 3 things that you need. So here's kind of what it looks like. So you've got the river running in, okay, ocean, okay, it's semi-enclosed, all right? So it's like partially cut off. You can't have like water coming in from over here, okay? And then fresh water, salt water from the ocean, mixing between the 2, and so you've got an estuary. 2 terms that you'll hear when referring to estuaries, you'll hear the term the head of the estuary. Okay, that refers to the area where the river's running in. And then the mouth of the estuary is where it opens up to the ocean. Okay? So those are just two terms. All right, so let's look at a couple of places and see if we can figure out if they're estuaries or not. And the map, I'll help you figure out the map. Okay, so this is San Francisco Bay. All right, and everything that's like in yellow and green, that's water, and then kind of like the brownish green color, that's land. Okay, so this is San Francisco Bay, so is it semi-enclosed? Yes. Okay, this red part right here, this is like where kind of a river comes in. So if you've got fresh water and salt water, you've got 2 types of water, yeah? If you have 2 types of water, they're probably going to mix, yeah? So San Francisco Bay is actually an estuary. So. Maybe. It's a bay, but it's also an estuary. All right, Monterey Bay. So this is Monterey Bay, just a little bit south. okay, of San Francisco, and this land kind of comes up like here, okay. So is that semi-enclosed? Yeah, it's like 3 sides, right, that are covered, and this little piece kind of comes up like this. You see that? Okay, so it is semi-enclosed, not as enclosed as San Francisco Bay, but it is semi-enclosed. You do have fresh water that runs in here. You get saltwater mixing. Monterey Bay is an estuary. Okay, so parts of it are an estuary. Okay, so we've got 4 types of estuaries that you can find in Wow, sorry. 4 total types of estuaries. 2 types that you can find in California. 2 types that exist but are not found in California. So the first type of estuary that you will find in California is called a drowned river valley, or a drowned river estuary. Okay, so drowned river valleys are formed when rivers run into the ocean. And when rivers run into the ocean, rivers have a good, strong erosive force on land as they run over land. As they run over the land, they form this valley, okay? Like the Colorado River has formed like the Grand Canyon, okay? So rivers can form valleys. And so as they run into the ocean, they form these valleys. And then as sea levels rise because of melting glaciers and rising temperatures, the sea level rises and fills in that valley that was created by the river, and it drowns the river valley, right? So it's called a drowned river, okay, estuary. And so now you get salt water, fresh water, because the river keeps running into that same spot. It's semi-enclosed because it's now in that valley, right? Mixing between the two, estuary, okay? So this picture is to show you how Delaware Bay formed. So these like white lines right here, okay, this represents like the valleys that were carved by the rivers as they ran into the ocean. The blue is the sea level, okay, and so sea level rises, fills in those valleys. You see that? Okay, and then you still have the rivers running in, salt water, and you get an estuary. So Delaware Bay is an estuary as well. If the sea levels keep rising, this is what Delaware Bay will eventually look like. All right, at some point. The other type of California estuary is one that you might expect. It's a tectonic estuary. So formed by earthquakes. All right. We had an earthquake like 3 days ago, yeah? So tectonic estuary. San Francisco Bay is actually a tectonic estuary. San Francisco is located between 2 faults. Okay, so you've got the San Andreas Fault right here, and you've got the Hayward Fault right here. Okay, and so tectonic estuaries are formed when you've got like chunks of land in between these 2 faults, and you get a really big earthquake, and this piece of land between the 2 faults drops. All right, so you can see this in the picture on the left, right? So different layers. So this piece of land used to be up here because of an earthquake, dropped down. That's a big earthquake, right? So it drops down, sea fills it in because it's below sea level, water runs to the lowest point. Okay, so this is a low point now, so rivers and whatever fresh water will start emptying into here. So you get fresh water, salt water, mixing, semi-enclosed, you get an estuary, okay, formed by earthquake. All right, non-California estuaries. So you have 2 types of non-California estuaries. The first type is a bar-built estuary. You don't find these in California. You do find them on the East Coast, though. And examples would be like Albemarle Sound and Pamlico Sound and Barnegat Bay. And these are formed when rivers run into the ocean. And the rivers are carrying lots of sediment and dirt from coming over land and erosion. And when it gets into the ocean, the water's not moving as fast, and so that sediment has time to settle out, and it will actually form like barrier islands, okay, which will help to cause that to be semi-enclosed. So this is Albemarle Sound, this is Pamlico, and then you see this would be like where your rivers are running in, okay, and then you see this white line right here, yeah, you see that? Can you see kind of like the islands that are right along there? Okay, those are formed from the sediment coming into the river coming into the ocean, and then sediment falling out, and it builds up enough to form like islands, which helps to cut it off from the open ocean and make it semi-enclosed. Do you see that? Yeah? Okay. So it's called the bar-built estuary. Okay, and then the last type of estuary is called a fjord. This is not a fjord, okay? It is a fjord. These you find like in Alaska, but a lot of them will also be like in Norway and Sweden and stuff, okay? And these are formed by glaciers. So glaciers are big chunks of ice that are moving down land towards the ocean, okay? And as they move across the surface of the earth, they have huge erosive powers as well. They can carve deep, deep valleys very quickly into the earth, into the crust. So they carve these big, deep valleys, and then glacier melts. You're left with a valley that's below sea level. Ocean comes, fills it in. Again, low point, so fresh water runs down into that area. Freshwater, saltwater mixing, semi-enclosed. Yay, estuary. Okay. If you go on like one of the Alaska cruises, a lot of times they'll take you into these fjords. This is what it looks like if you do go in there. Right? You can kind of see the steep sides on there. That's from the glacier carving that big valley. All right. Okay. Water circulation in an estuary. This is very, very general. Okay. If you were in honors, you would be learning about like all of the different ways that water can mix in an estuary. So this is just a general overview of what can happen. Okay, what does happen. First semester, freshwater, more or less dense than salt water? Less dense. Okay, so freshwater, as it comes into the salt water or meets the salt water, the fresh water tends to flow out on top of the salt water because it's less dense. Remember last semester when we made like our little layers of water that we colored, and so you could see the separation between the two? Okay, so the fresh water is less dense, so it tends to flow out on top of the salt water. And the salt water, okay, from the ocean comes up the estuary, and it gets moved by the tides, right? So the tides will pull it in and out, okay? And so the salt water moves up the estuary. As it moves up, it becomes more and more shallow, okay, which forces that water upwards. And as the water from the river comes out on top, and this water gets forced up, it mixes together. You see that? Okay, and so you get a gradient from fresh water to saltier and saltier and saltier water until you get to the 35 parts per thousand, which is full on open ocean. Yeah? So that's in general what's going to happen. And so you also get vertical variations in salinity, right? If you start here at the top and you go to like travel in a straight line down, you can get like 3 different salinities. These different colors represent different salinities. You see that? So the salinity will vary horizontally and vertically in an estuary. Whoops. Okay, this is honors. Oops, here we go. Okay, so why does mixing matter? Why do we care? We care because you get the animals that live there care. So do you remember last semester when we talked about osmosis? Yeah. Okay. What happens to an animal if it's placed into a hypotonic solution? Salt doesn't move. What moves? Water. Water goes in. Yes, good. What about a hypertonic solution? Water goes out. Good. Okay, so water is going to move from areas of low water high water concentration to low water concentration, or it's going to go towards the salt. Okay, and so if you're an animal that is living in an estuary, okay, go to here. Okay, Let's say you're this little green starfish right here. All right. There is like a variation in salinity. These like variations in salinities will actually move up and down the estuary with the tides. So when it's high tide, okay, you get more salt water entering the estuary, and when it's low tide, more fresh water. You see that? So these like changes in salinities will move up and down. So if you're a little starfish living here, okay, you're going to be subjected to a wide variety of salinities as the tides come in and out. Yeah? Do you see that? Okay. So animals have to be able to deal with these changes in salinity. And you have animals that will do that in a variety of methods. You have some animals that, you know, will change they're called osmoconformers, and they can, you know, change their salinity, and like water concentration changes with the surrounding salinity and water concentration. Osmoregulators will like maintain their salt and water balance no matter what salinity they're in. Okay, so they can either conform or they don't, but you do have animals that are so depending on whether the animal is an osmoregulator or an osmoconformer, they will be considered to be either a euryhaline animal or a sthenohaline animal. So a euryhaline animal is able to withstand a wide variety of salinities. And if that animal can withstand a wide variety of salinities, it is found throughout the estuary, large areas of the estuary, because they can withstand lots of salinities. A sthenohaline organism can only withstand like a very narrow range of salinities, so it can only be found in certain parts of the estuary. So this picture here is to help, again, for you to see how the salinity will change with the tides. So the yellow line would be like where an animal would live, okay, and then this is like 10 parts per thousand, okay, and this would be the salinity that they're in at low tide, and then at high tide, okay, they're in like saltier water, like about 15 parts per thousand. Okay, so it varies. So compare a euryhaline and a sthenohaline organism. This represents the estuary. So over here would be like the river, over here would be the ocean. Okay, and these like different colored lines represent the different salinities. So you have 0 parts per thousand, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. See that? Okay, so a euryhaline animal that can withstand 5 to 25 parts per thousand, okay, a wide range of salinities. We're going to represent it with a green line, okay. It can be found anywhere from here to here in the estuary. You see that? Because it can withstand any of these salinities. Yes? A sthenohaline organism, like this little crab over here, that can withstand 5 to 10 parts per thousand, red line, okay, it can only be found like right here, because that's where the salinity is that it requires. You see that? Okay, so you have euryhaline and sthenohaline organisms. Make sense? Okay, so that's in general the circulation of water in an estuary. We're going to look at a couple of habitats that you find around estuaries. The habitats will vary depending on where you are on Earth. So in the tropics, like around an estuary, you can find like mangrove forests, whereas like in the temperate and subpolar regions, you can find like salt marshes. Okay, so we're going to talk in general about some of the habitats that you can find, but just know that those habitats can be like mixed and matched depending on where you are on Earth. Okay, so one of the habitats that you'll find, and well, this one's in all estuaries, is the subtidal region of the estuary. The subtidal region is the region that is always underwater. Okay, many parts of an estuary can actually be intertidal, get covered and uncovered by the tides, but the subtidal region is always underwater. This is going to make up the main part of the estuary, the main body of the estuary, and then anything that is like a tidal channel, it's like branches off of the main estuary, that are always underwater. So this is like one of the critical habitats for things that survive around an estuary or in an estuary, because this is where many things are going to live. And it's also critical for many of our commercial species. So the species that we hunt or fish in order to eat, they actually spend a lot of their life here in an estuary. They actually like spend their baby years in an estuary until they reach a certain size, and then they move out into the open ocean. So the subtidal region of the estuary is important for us and our food source as well. Okay, so yeah, about 3/4 of our commercial species spend part of their life in an estuary. Oyster reefs are another habitat. Okay, oyster reefs. Oyster reefs are formed from oysters, and they're formed when oysters start growing on top of each other and cementing to each other. And as they grow on top of each other and cement to each other, they form like a whole reef structure. So it's kind of like a coral reef, but not formed out of coral, formed out of oysters. Yeah. It's more rare to find them on the West Coast. They're a lot of times, yeah, these are mostly found on the East Coast. This is where you'd go, like if you want to go and get, oysters for dinner, okay, or search for a pearl, something like that. Okay. So these are intertidal. So these are areas that will be covered and uncovered by the tides. Okay. Covered and uncovered by the tides. So this is at low tide. This is like when it's exposed. Okay. And it's going to provide a habitat for a lot of things, protection from predators. That's what they look like. That's a close-up. Okay. The next habitat that you'll find, or you can find, is a mud flat. Okay, mud flats are oftentimes intertidal as well. Okay, so they're a lot of times intertidal. You'll see in the video that you'll watch tomorrow, they'll have a section where you'll see like the mud flats. The mud flats have lots of animals that burrow into them. And so when it's low tide, all the animals like burrow into there, like worms and clams and stuff like that. And then lots of birds come to feed on the mud flats during this time. And then at high tide, when the water comes in, the animals crawl out and they move around and they feed, and ocean predators come up to eat them. So it's actually a good food source for a lot of different things. Mud flats are exactly what they sound like. They're big flat areas of mud. Okay, so here's what they look like. Okay, so you've got mud flat, mud flat, mud flat. Okay, this is to kind of show you types of things that would be buried in the dirt there. Mud flats a lot of times are actually like found with salt marshes. So, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Here. So if this is like the main body of the estuary and our water, okay, this would be the mud flat area. That would be the intertidal, right? So it'd be covered and uncovered by the tides. And then above the mud flat, we would find salt marshes. All right? Yes? Okay,